What happens when a country icon walks into the View expecting a friendly chat, only to face a woman who never holds back her punches and refuses to back down? What starts as a simple talk about music spirals into a full-blown cultural showdown that leaves the studio in stunned silence. This isn't just a clash of opinions, it's Blake Shelton versus Joy Behar, a collision between pride and provocation, between heartland honesty and media arrogance. This isn't just television. This is the moment when two worlds finally go to war. Blake Shelton walked onto the View set that morning like a man who'd been here before. Relaxed, charming, every bit the country star America knew him to be. It was supposed to be a routine interview, a friendly chat about his new album, his tour, maybe a joke or two about life on the road. But across the table sat Joy Behar, eyes sharp and smile thinner than usual. She wasn't planning on talking about his music. Not today. Joy had read the headlines, seen the interviews, and decided Blake needed a reality check. To her, he wasn't just another celebrity guest. He was a symbol of everything she thought was wrong with America's obsession with nostalgia and small-town purity. The second Blake took his seat, Joy leaned forward, her tone sweet, but laced with venom. So, Blake Shelton, the voice of real America, huh? Or just the voice of a very convenient brand? The air in the studio changed instantly. The smile on Blake's face didn't fade, but his eyes told a different story. Steady, focused, and ready. "Well, Joy," he said calmly, "at least it's a brand built on honesty, not outrage." For a moment, no one moved. Joy blinked, clearly not expecting him to bite back so quickly. The audience gave a small, uncertain laugh, unsure if this was playful banter or something else entirely. Joy crossed her arms, her lips curling into a smirk. "Honesty," she repeated slowly. "That's rich, coming from a guy who sells fairy tales about small-town perfection while living in Hollywood luxury." Blake tilted his head slightly, that grin returning, though it carried an edge this time. "Maybe I just remember where I came from," he replied. "Some folks forget once they start yelling for a living." Joy's smirk dropped, replaced by the faintest flash of annoyance. This wasn't going to be a soft interview, not today. Joy leaned back in her chair, eyes locked on Blake like a hunter lining up her shot. "You know what I find funny, Blake?" she began, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You sell this version of America that doesn't exist anymore. The small-town dream. Pickup trucks, flags waving in the wind, front porches, everyone baking pies and saying grace before dinner. You sell the fantasy that purity only lives in small towns." The words landed hard, cutting through the air like a blade. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two, realizing this wasn't just an interview anymore. It was an ambush. Blake didn't flinch. He let the silence stretch, his eyes steady on Joy. "You call it a fantasy," he said finally, his voice calm but sharp. "But maybe that fantasy's a lot closer to reality than your version of America, where everyone's too busy yelling to listen." A few people in the audience gasped softly. Even Whoopi raised an eyebrow, sensing the line had drawn blood. Blake's tone wasn't loud, but it had weight, the kind that didn't need volume to make an impact. Joy's lips curled into a smirk, her voice dropping low as if daring him to go further. "That's cute," she said with a mocking laugh. "Do you rehearse that line with your PR team? Or does it come with the cowboy hat?" Blake chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Joy. It comes with growing up around people who say what they mean, and mean what they say." The crowd stirred, a ripple of quiet approval passing through them. Joy's eyes narrowed, realizing she'd hit a nerve, and maybe awoken something she couldn't control. She leaned forward again, elbows on the table, and said, "Oh, don't get all noble on me, Blake. You're not America's preacher. You're a product, one built to make people feel good about ignoring the real world." Blake's smile faded now. His voice dropped, colder this time. "And you're built to make them feel guilty for it." The tension was now thick enough to cut. Both of them knew there was no turning back. What started as a conversation about music had become something else entirely. A showdown over who gets to define what real America means, and neither was backing down. Joy didn't waste another second before going for the jugular. "You know what really gets me, Blake," she said, leaning forward with that signature grin that never quite reached her eyes. "You live in mansions, fly on private jets, drink imported whiskey, but you keep selling that common man act like you're still fixing tractors in Oklahoma." The audience tensed. Even for Joy, that was blunt. Blake blinked slowly, his jaw tightening. But when he spoke, his voice stayed calm. Almost too calm. "Success doesn't erase where you come from," he said evenly. "Unless, of course, you're ashamed of it." The room went still. For a brief second, Joy didn't have a comeback. Her expression flickered, like she'd been slapped with a truth she didn't expect to hurt. Then she forced a laugh, brushing the moment off. "Oh, please," she said, waving her hand. "You've turned nostalgia into a brand. You're not sharing your story, Blake. You're selling it. The hard-working, beer-drinking cowboy shtick. It's marketing." Blake's eyes sharpened, and for the first time, the smile completely disappeared from his face. "You think I'm marketing?" he said quietly. "I grew up in Ada, Oklahoma. My dad worked construction. My mom ran a beauty shop. I watched my parents scrape by every week just to keep the lights on. And I'm proud of that." Joy interrupted before he could finish. "Save it for your next single," she snapped, her tone cutting like glass. "You've turned nostalgia into currency." That did it. The muscle in Blake's jaw twitched as he leaned slightly forward, voice low but dangerous. "And you've turned cynicism into a career." The words landed like a punch. Joy froze, caught between anger and disbelief, while the studio filled with that heavy silence that only comes when two people realize they've crossed a line, and there's no way back. Blake sat back, unblinking, his voice steady but colder now. "You talk like caring about where you came from is some kind of weakness, but for me, it's the reason I am who I am. You mock it because you've forgotten what it feels like to belong somewhere." Joy's grin faltered for the first time all morning. Her eyes flickered, defensive, unsure. The audience could feel it too. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was personal. Joy leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Her tone was calm at first, too calm, the kind that always came before she went for blood. "You know, Blake," she said, tilting her head, "I've met a lot of entertainers who try to pass themselves off as the voice of the people. But you—" She paused, smiling coldly. "You're about as authentic as a $3 bill, Nashville's factory-made cowboy. Everything about you is a product. The drawl, the hat, the humble talk about small towns. It's all packaging." The words hit like a slap. The other hosts went silent. One of them started to speak, but thought better of it. Blake didn't react right away. He sat still for a long moment, jaw tightening slightly as his eyes locked on hers. Then he pushed his chair back and stood, slow and deliberate. His shadow stretched across the table as he looked down at Joy. "And you," he said, his voice low and steady, "are as open-minded as a locked door, Joy. The room tensed instantly. Joy's grin faltered for half a second before she forced it back. "Oh, come on," she said with a nervous laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't start getting dramatic, cowboy. You've built a career on taking criticism. You can handle a little truth." Blake stepped closer to the edge of the table, voice firm but controlled. "This isn't truth. It's contempt dressed up as cleverness. You sit here day after day tearing people down and calling it honesty. But you're not being honest. You're being cruel." His words came out with a quiet anger that made every syllable feel heavier. "You tear down faith, family, and pride, all while pretending you're the one holding people accountable. What's authentic about that?" Joy's smile vanished completely. Her face hardened. "It's called accountability," she snapped back, her voice rising. "Something your fans mistake for hate because they can't handle the truth." Blake let out a short, humorless laugh. "Accountability," he repeated. "You don't hold people accountable, Joy. You humiliate them. You twist their beliefs into punchlines, mock their traditions, and then act like you're saving the world." His tone sharpened. "There's a difference between asking hard questions and just enjoying watching someone squirm. And you love the squirming." Joy's hand hit the table with a loud slap. "You think I enjoy this? You think I enjoy calling out hypocrisy when it's right in front of me?" She shot back, her face flushed. "People like you profit off illusion. You sing about truth, but live behind security gates." Blake's voice dropped, low and cutting. "And people like you profit off division. You call it awareness, but it's just outrage with a camera on." The silence that followed was electric. Neither one looked away. Joy's breathing was heavier now, her jaw tight, eyes burning with anger that was part conviction, part disbelief that he'd dared to push back. Blake stood tall, his expression calm but unyielding, like a man who'd finally had enough. Joy straightened in her chair, her tone sharper now, each word like a pointed arrow. "You know what your problem is, Blake? This whole real America shtick of yours. It divides people. You create this false line between the so-called heartland and the rest of us, like only folks from small towns get to claim decency or love for their country." Her voice rose slightly, the confidence of someone who'd made this argument 100 times before. "That's not unity. It's manipulation." Blake didn't look away. "No," he said quietly. "It unites the ones who've been ignored." His voice wasn't loud, but it hit with weight. "It gives a voice to people who work, who struggle, who feel invisible every time someone like you calls them backwards for believing in faith, family, and country." Joy laughed under her breath, shaking her head. "That's not unity. That's marketing. You sing about flags and freedom, while politicians line their pockets off that same sentiment. You're part of the machine, Blake. You just make it rhyme." Blake leaned forward slightly, his tone cooling into something steadier. "You keep saying it's manipulation, but maybe it's just meaning. Something your show forgot how to do. You spend every morning tearing people apart, and then wonder why the country feels divided." The room fell still. Joy blinked, taken aback by how calmly he said it. The tension was no longer just about politics. It was about something deeper. Then Blake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You think patriotism is propaganda because you've forgotten what sacrifice smells like," he said, each word slow and deliberate. "Try visiting a small-town VFW sometime before you mock the flag." That did it. Joy shot up from her chair, the legs screeching against the floor. "Don't you dare question my patriotism," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "I've spent my whole life speaking truth to power, fighting for what's right in this country, while people like you hide behind cheap slogans and beer can philosophy." Blake didn't move an inch. He looked at her steadily, his voice almost a whisper now. "I'm not questioning your patriotism," he said. "I'm questioning your empathy." The words landed heavier than any shout could have. Joy froze, caught off guard. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. Her jaw tightened, but the confidence in her eyes wavered. The audience could feel it. The fight had changed tone. This wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about who still believed that love for one's country could exist without being mocked. Blake stopped mid-sentence, the kind of pause that makes a room hold its breath. The overhead lights reflected off the glossy table, casting sharp shadows across Joy's face. He turned toward her, calm but unflinching. "You know what gets me, Joy," he began, voice steady but cutting through the silence. "You've spent decades preaching equality, compassion, understanding, all those words that sound great on paper. But the moment someone doesn't talk like you, think like you, or vote like you mock them, you laugh at them, you call them ignorant." Joy's jaw tightened, her chin lifting in defiance. "That's not mockery, Blake," she shot back, her voice rising. "That's education. It's about telling the truth, even when people don't want to hear it." Blake gave a small, humorless laugh and took a step closer, his boots echoing against the floor. "Then your education system's failing, Joy," he said quietly, "because all it's teaching people is how to sneer." His words hung heavy in the air. No one spoke. The other co-hosts shifted awkwardly in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Joy tried to recover, reaching for that familiar mix of sarcasm and authority. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "You can't blame me for calling out hypocrisy when I see it." Blake didn't blink. "No, but you might want to recognize your own." She frowned, confused for just a second, and that was all the space he needed. He reached for the glass of water on the table, lifted it halfway, then set it down again with deliberate calm. "I remember something you said on this show a while back," he continued. "You looked right into the camera and said, 'People in red states vote against their own interests.'" He paused, letting the quote sink in. Then his gaze locked onto hers. "Remember that?" Joy's lips parted, but no sound came out. The color drained slightly from her face. Blake's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Maybe the problem isn't how they vote," he said slowly. "Maybe it's that you never listened." The words hit like a punch. Not loud, not showy, but devastating. Joy stared back at him, struggling to form a reply. For the first time since the segment began, she had nothing. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Blake's eyes never left hers. It wasn't anger now. It was disappointment. Joy's composure finally cracked. The tension that had been simmering through the entire segment exploded all at once. She slammed her hand on the table so hard that the microphones picked up the sharp thud. "I'm sick of men like you hiding behind guitars and beer cans while the world burns," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. Her face flushed, eyes burning with a kind of rage that was no longer about politics. It was personal now. "You sit there writing songs about sunsets and county fairs while people are out there losing everything." Blake didn't move at first. He just stood there, expression unreadable, letting her words hang in the air. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. Not aggressive, but deliberate. "And I'm sick of people like you thinking outrage is the same as wisdom," he said evenly. "You've built a career on being angry. You confuse volume with truth, and you wear that anger like a badge of honor." His tone wasn't mocking. It was disappointed, like a teacher talking to a student who should know better. "You think yelling loud enough makes you right. It doesn't. It just makes everyone stop listening." Joy stared at him, breathing hard. "Ignorance is not peace," she shot back, voice shaking. "You hide behind fake comfort while pretending the world isn't on fire." Blake's eyes narrowed. "And bitterness," he said softly, "is not enlightenment." The calm in his voice was more cutting than shouting ever could be. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his tone. "You've forgotten that sometimes people don't need a fight. They just need a moment to breathe." Joy's lips curled into a sneer. "You're delusional," she spat. Blake didn't flinch. His reply came without hesitation. "At least I'm not miserable." The audience gasped. Even the camera operators froze, unsure whether to keep filming or cut to commercial. The words hung between them like the eye of a storm. Deadly quiet, but full of energy ready to explode again at any second. Joy's mouth opened as if to respond, but nothing came out. Her face tightened, her jaw set, but she couldn't find another insult. For the first time since Blake had walked onto the set, she looked uncertain, not defeated, but shaken. Blake's voice broke the silence once more, softer this time. "You can't preach empathy while hating everyone who disagrees with you," he said. "That's not progress. That's poison." And for a few seconds, even Joy had no comeback. The control she prided herself on had finally slipped, and everyone watching knew it. For a moment, no one spoke. The lights hummed softly overhead, and the tension in the studio felt almost physical, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Blake's chest rose and fell slowly as he looked down at Joy. Then, without a word, he reached up, took off his cowboy hat, and placed it gently on the table in front of him. The gesture was simple, but the silence that followed made it monumental. It wasn't just a pause. It was a statement. He met Joy's eyes and said quietly, "You're right, Joy. I'm a millionaire. I've been blessed with success, and I live a different life now than I did growing up. But here's the thing." He paused, his voice low but steady. "I've never faked who I am. I've never lied about where I came from or what I believe in." His gaze sharpened, cutting through the air like glass. "Can you say the same?" The entire room went still. Even the background hum of the cameras seemed to fade. Joy froze in her seat, blinking like she hadn't heard him correctly. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. The audience was dead quiet, the kind of silence that only follows a truth too sharp to ignore. For the first time that morning, Joy didn't look like the unshakable host. She looked cornered. She forced herself to speak, her voice tighter than before. "What are you implying?" she demanded, trying to regain her footing. The words sounded strong, but her tone betrayed her. Thin, defensive, uncertain. Blake didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm implying," he said slowly, "that maybe the only thing faker than a $3 bill is your version of honesty." It hit like a slow, cold knife. Not a shout, not an insult, just truth delivered without mercy. Joy sat perfectly still, the muscles in her jaw twitching as she tried to hold her composure. Her eyes flickered for a moment, anger, disbelief, maybe even a hint of shame, before she masked it again with silence. But it was too late. The damage was done. Blake picked up his hat again, brushing it lightly with his thumb as if wiping away dust that wasn't there. He didn't look angry anymore, he just looked finished. Then, as he settled it back on his head, He said one last line, quiet but final. "You wanted real? That's it." And just like that, the balance of power shifted. Joy Behar, the woman who'd made a career out of cornering guests, sat speechless on her own stage, while the man she'd tried to dismantle walked away with the last word. The cameras kept rolling, but the show was already over. The studio felt heavier than ever. The air had gone still, no laughter, no chatter, not even the faint hum of cameras could cut through the tension. Blake stood tall, his hands resting calmly at his sides, eyes locked on Joy. When he finally spoke, his tone was quiet, but laced with the kind of authority that doesn't need to shout. "This show used to be about dialogue," he said evenly. "People could disagree and still listen. But now," he shook his head slowly, "now it's about demolition, tearing someone down just because they don't fit your script." Joy leaned back in her chair, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then maybe," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "you're just too fragile for the truth." The line was meant to sting, but it landed flat. The words hung in the air, hollow, like something even she didn't fully believe. Blake didn't react right away. He looked at her for a moment, long enough to make the silence uncomfortable, then said quietly, "No. Maybe you're just too addicted to noise to hear it." His voice didn't rise, but it cut deep. The audience didn't cheer, didn't gasp. They just watched, frozen. For a moment, Joy tried to hold his gaze, but it slipped. The energy had shifted completely. Blake took one slow step back from the table, adjusting his hat. His movements were calm, deliberate. The kind of calm that only comes from someone who's already decided to walk away. Then he turned slightly, looking toward the audience, then back at Joy. His tone softened, but it carried finality. "Where I come from," he said quietly, "we leave the room when respect's gone." He paused, then gave a faint, tired smile. "Guess I'm right on time." He gave a small nod, not a bow of surrender, but of closure, and turned toward the exit. His boots echoed softly against the studio floor as he walked away, each step slower and more deliberate than the last. He didn't look back once. Joy stood there, speechless, still gripping the edge of the desk. Her microphone was still live, but no words came out. The woman who always had a comeback had none. The cameras kept rolling as the silence stretched, raw and uncomfortable. It was over, not with a bang, not with a fight, but with a man walking away from a conversation that had stopped being one. And in that silence, something undeniable lingered. Not just who had won, but who had lost the ability to listen. When the doors closed behind Blake, the silence that followed was deafening. The remaining hosts sat frozen, eyes darting toward Joy, unsure if they should say something, anything, to break the tension. But no one did. The applause sign above the cameras stayed dark. No one clapped. No one smiled. For the first time in The View's long history of fiery debates, the fire had gone out completely. What had started as a harmless interview about music had ended as something else, a televised reckoning. Joy sat rigid in her chair, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as if to steady herself. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven. Across the table, the empty chair where Blake had been just moments ago seemed to loom larger than the rest, a quiet reminder of everything that had just happened. There were no jokes, no light-hearted transitions, no smooth segues into commercial breaks. Just silence. It wasn't the silence of a show running out of time. It was the silence of people realizing they'd just witnessed something raw, something real. No cameras cut away. No one moved to comfort Joy. No producer dared yell, "Cut," It didn't need backstage chaos or dramatic music. The stillness said it all. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a mirror held up to television itself. A clash between arrogance and authenticity, cynicism and sincerity. And no one watching could look away. As the broadcast faded out, the narrator's voice came in softly, almost like a whisper breaking the quiet. Was Blake right to walk away? Or was Joy right to push back? Either way, America just watched two worlds collide. Live, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Was Blake right to walk away? Or was Joy right to push back? Either way, America just watched two worlds collide. Live, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more explosive moments that pull back the curtain on power, pride, and truth.